You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist. Nationalist. Nothing. Use that word. Use that word.
Joining us from El Paso, his hometown and the city he represented in Congress, Democratic candidate for President Beto O'Rourke. Beto, it's great to have you back on the show, given the horrible timing and circumstances. I'll start with your very personal and emotional reaction, frustration with the media's questions, frustration with the entire situation, and I couldn't agree with you more, frustration with the president and his white supremacy and his racism. But how now to break the hold that he has on Republicans? Because that's the missing link right here.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the challenge that we have right now. If we don't call this out, if we don't do something, our silence becomes our complicity, not just in the hatred and the racism from the president, but in the violence that we saw here in El Paso just a couple of days ago. This is a city that in an average year will lose 18 people over the course of the year. In one day, 20 people killed in a hateful, racist, murderous rage, in part inspired by this president. So we've got to ask everyone in this country, could care less about your party. You got to stand up and be counted on this one. And there are too many voices that today are still silent.
So, Congressman, there are too many voices that are still silent. We await Republicans calling out the president's hate speech that obviously inspired this killer. If you read his own words, there has been one exception, at least. Texas General Land Office Commissioner George P. Bush called on Americans to stand against, quote, white terrorism. Bush, the son of Florida's former governor Jeb Bush, issued a statement on Twitter Saturday, writing in part that white terrorism was a real and present threat that we all must denounce and defeat. Former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein commended Bush's statement, tweeting in part, killing random civilians to spread a political message is terrorism. FBI classifies it as domestic terrorism, but white terrorism is more precise. Beto, the Obama administration in the early years took a lot of grief for not calling Islamic terrorism by its name, according to conservative critics. Other than George P. Bush, do we have the same problem with Republicans who are afraid to call white terrorism white terrorism?
We do have that problem with Republican office holders at large. But in the case of George P. Bush, and Ted Cruz, for that matter, who had some strong words about this kind of terrorism, they need to take the next step and connect that to President Trump and the fact that he has repeatedly talked about an invasion. He has described human beings from Mexico and Central America as an infestation. At a rally in your home state of Florida, when he asked, how do we stop this? And someone yells out, we shoot them. He laughs along with the crowd, ginning them up to talk about sending her back, defending Nazis and white supremacists and Klansmen as very fine people. We, George P. Bush, all of us have to acknowledge that there's a real consequence. If we do not do that, if we don't connect the dots for the people, we're going to continue to have this same problem going forward. And so I'm grateful for the start that they've made. They need to finish the job and make that connection.
So, Congressman, you talk about that connection that needs to be made, the dots that need to be connected, and yet we have had warnings time and again. I'm sure you saw the former FBI head of counterterrorism, Frank Figliuzzi, 4 days before El Paso, saying, I saw all the warning lights blinking before 9/11. I see those warning lights again. The president's hateful rhetoric is going to lead to more white supremacist killings. I mean, it's not like this hasn't. It's not like Republicans haven't been warned about this for years now, and yet they continue in silence to not call the president out by name. They just won't say it.
That's right. And I do think that this extends to much of the media in this country. I mean, the president has not been shy. He's not been saying this behind closed doors. This is out in the open. You know, all people of one religion inherently defective and should be banned from the shores of this country. The only modern Western democracy that I can think of that said anything close to this is the Third Reich, Nazi Germany. Talking about human beings as though they are animals, making them subhuman to make it okay to put their kids in cages. We've lost 7 children in our custody just over the last year in this, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, saying that he wants more immigrants like those from Nordic countries, the whitest places on the face of the planet. This president, his open racism is also an invitation to violence. We've seen a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years. So, Joe, you're absolutely right. The writing has been on the wall since his maiden speech coming down that escalator describing Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals. The actions that follow cannot surprise us. And anyone who is surprised is part of this problem right now, including members of the media who ask, hey, Beto, do you think the president is racist? Well, Jesus Christ, of course he's racist. He's been racist from day one, before day one, when he was questioning whether Barack Obama was born in the United States. He's trafficked in this stuff from the very beginning. And we are reaping right now what he has sown and what his supporters in Congress have sown. We have to put a stop to it.
Congressman, this is Eddie Glaude. We are obviously...
Well, Eddie Glaude, really quickly, let me add one insult also, one racist slur into this conversation. The President of the United States also called Hispanics breeders.
Yes.
So he talks about an infestation. He calls Hispanics breeders, calls Mexicans rapists. Again, it's obvious where this leads. Go ahead, Eddie Glaude. You've got the next question.
Congressman Beto, we're at an inflection point. We've had these moments in our history where the country had to make a choice of which direction we would go. Kind of the disease in our soul kind of made itself known. You're running for president, and you're running for president in an environment where we are deeply, deeply divided, where the choice is right in front of us. How would you step into the breach? What would you say to bring us together as the president of the United States following someone like Donald Trump? How would you march us into the future, given what we're currently experiencing now?
You know, I saw it last night in El Paso at a vigil in this community. Thousands of people came forward. Democrats, independents, Republicans, folks who may not vote or register at all. Every tradition of faith, every walk of life, people who've been Americans for generations, folks who live in Ciudad Juarez or just got here to El Paso yesterday, but everybody coming together to ensure that we are not defined or divided by our differences. This country very consciously 243 years ago decided not to define ourselves by race or ethnicity or common ancestry. We said we are all created equal. We've never fully fulfilled that in this country, of course, but that person in the position of public trust in the White House should do everything within his power to bring us together, that more perfect union that we always endeavor to achieve. That is our opportunity right now at this moment. In El Paso, I've got to tell you, though we bore the brunt of this hatred, we're also the best example for this country going forward, a city of immigrants that is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America today, not despite, but because we've come from the planet over to call this community and this country home. Their very presence makes us stronger, safer, and more successful than we would have been otherwise. We lose sight of that at our peril, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that America remembers this at this defining moment of truth.
So, Congressman, off that answer, you've participated in 2 debates, stood on the stage with a bunch of other Democrats, and each of you gets about 7 seconds to talk about soybeans and health care and everything like that. And at a certain level, they're all important issues. But there's a school of thought, Congressman, that there is really only one issue right now facing this country, and it's the incumbent president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Do you believe that that is really the only principal, most important issue for the country going forward, removal of this president?
Yes. Nothing else is possible unless Donald Trump is defeated in November of 2020. You will not be able to successfully confront climate change if you have a man in the White House who will not utter the word, who does not believe in facts or the truth or science, someone who is trying to take away health care from our fellow Americans. You will not be able to get to universal care. But perhaps even more important than all of that, you have someone who is actively dismantling this democracy, undermining every single institution, the sanctity of our elections, the fact that he's invited foreign powers to invade this country, not once in 2016, but again this very year, sought to obstruct the pursuit of justice into what happened in our democracy. Undermines and ridicules federal judges, including those who are Mexican Americans based on their ethnicity. He seeks to drive us apart, to divide us, to make us afraid, to make us angry. And to some degree, as we saw in El Paso on Saturday, he is succeeding. So, yes, he is an existential threat to the future of this country, at least to a democratic future for this country, and he must be stopped. And that drive has to transcend partisanship. Republicans, independents, Democrats alike must see this as necessary for a successful future for this country.
Congressman O'Rourke, it's Walter Isaacson. You just said it's an existential threat. Mike Barnicle has been talking about it's the one big thing, and Eddie says we're at an inflection point. But when we've been there before, it wasn't just that we tried to tweet it or that we tried to say a few good things. People got out into the streets in March, the way they're doing in Hong Kong right now, the way they did in Puerto Rico to change things. Why do you think there hasn't been more of sort of just a mass feeling that every month we have to march the way we did before when we were in what you call existential crisis in this country?
You know, I'm beginning to see that, or perhaps all of us are beginning to see that in this country. The students who are marching, not just for their lives, but for all of our lives, the young people who are forcing the conversation on climate. We just celebrated the 55th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. And like any Texan, I'm really proud of Lyndon Baines Johnson signing that into law and using his initial political capital to get it passed. But that was really forced by the kids in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, that Children's Crusade, 1,200 of them arrested on the first day of the march, kids going up against fire hoses that can peel the bark off of a tree. That kind of sacrifice shocked the conscience of this country, and it galvanized the political will necessary to get that done. I see those movements beginning all across this country, and much like in 1963, so often led by young people. They are going to force this change. They get it perhaps better than anyone else. And so I'm optimistic, believe it or not, more hopeful than I've ever been, given the challenge that we face, this moment of peril. This country is going to rise to the occasion. It really will. So let's have faith in one another at a moment that the president wants us to fear one another. Let's have hope for the future, and then let's act on it. And that's what I'm trying to do every single day, certainly right here in El Paso right now.
So, Beto O'Rourke, I really appreciate Joe and I both appreciate your message, which is no longer what is going on. What is going on? It's what are we going to do about it? Because it is obvious what is going on. Beto O'Rourke, thank you very much for being on the show this morning.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.